Ladies and gentlemen, family and friends, patriots all over the country, that is under God. Welcome to tonight's Red America First Town Hall, the nation's #1 most engaging platform where we, the people, run the show. Red for the blood of Christ, America First policies and candidates. And I'm your host, Ashley Weiss. Welcome to our National Town Hall where we gather with patriots all over the nation to discuss critical issues and hear from inspiring voices. Every Thursday night. For 3 years, Red America First has been a beacon for the unheard Americans, championing the values of faith, freedom, and family. Our mission is to empower communities, advocate for America First policies, and ensure that the voices of all Americans are heard.
And I'm your co-host, Valerie Weiss. Tonight's first special guest is retired Colonel Douglas Macgregor, a former senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense under the Trump administration. He is currently the CEO of Our Country, Our Choice. Colonel Macgregor is a respected leader known for his expertise in global conflicts and warfare. Following the Colonel's interview, we will hear an unheard American story featuring Mark McCloskey, known for he and his wife defending their property during Black Lives Matter riots while exercising their Second Amendment rights. We are eager to learn more about his experiences, but first we have exciting announcements to make. Go ahead.
Yes, do not forget next Thursday's Town Hall doubleheader, where we will be having General Flynn at noon, and then normal program at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we're going to have Mike Pargile, who's running for California's 35th District of Congress, and who's made it through the primaries, and we need to get him a victory. September 12th, we're going to have Tom Rentz, attorney, author, analyst, podcast host, and he's helped many service members during COVID. Friendly reminder, our team relies on all the support of our viewers and donors. We appreciate the help. Even $20 can help us out. Visit RedAmericaFirst.com and donate.
For those that are tuning in the live stream, join us for an engaging and informative evening as we continue our mission to make the unheard Americans heard and secure a prosperous future for our great nation. Join us every Thursday night.
Everyone, let's start with prayer. We're going to call on Pastor Bart Denny. He's going to lead us into prayer tonight, live from Michigan. So let me go ahead and pin him. And those Truthkins, family members, and friends, let's bow our heads. Thank you.
Our Father in heaven, Lord, we thank you this evening for once again allowing this group to meet together. Lord, this group of like-minded believers who are Christ followers and who love our homeland. Lord, so many here have served our land in so many ways, and we thank you for that, Father. Lord, in Romans 13, you tell us to be subject to the governing authorities. And Lord, whether they're good or evil, you have placed them there for your purposes. And Lord, we do want to be good citizens, both of our nation and of your heavenly kingdom. But Lord, we don't believe that you've called us to sit here and be silent. You've called us to speak out when rulers do wrong, and you've blessed us with the freedom to hold them account. Help us to do that, Lord, and help us to vote for leaders who will follow after you and what you want for this country and for the good of all. Lord, you call us to be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. And Lord, to be wise, we need to know truth. Lord, there's such a dearth of truth. We hear so much falsehood around us, Lord. We need truth tellers, and we need to hear from truth tellers. Tonight, Lord, you have us to hear from a great truth teller, Colonel Douglas Macgregor. Lord, help us to listen attentively to what he has to say, to interact with him, to learn from his incredible experience and perspective, Lord. And I just ask that you'd bless our time together now. We pray it all in the mighty, precious name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for that, Pastor Valerie. If you do the Pledge of Allegiance, she's the co-founder of Red America First. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much for that. Leslie Mahan, Oklahoma State Director for Red America First, will lead us in the National Anthem. Thank you in advance.
Thank you, Ashley and Valerie. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight for the ramparts we watched was so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red wave, the bombs bursting in, gave hope through the night that a flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land and the fair and the home of the
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for that, Leslie. Always amazing way to start an interview here. Let's go ahead and get ready for Colonel Douglas Macgregor. He's on now. Let's go ahead and get him front and center. Now, before we chat with you, Colonel, just hang on 1 second. Go ahead, Valerie.
Okay. Beautiful introduction to start this interview with Colonel Douglas Macgregor, who is a decorated combat veteran, is an author of 5 books, has a PhD, and is a defense foreign policy consultant and currently CEO of Our Country, Our Choice. Before we get started with the interview and member question and answers, our members are curious to learn about you. Where did you grow up? Tell us about you. Who is Douglas Macgregor? Thank you, Colonel, for coming on Red America First.
Well, I don't know how much I want to reveal. I don't know everybody that's out here tonight.
Oh, okay. Well, just where are you from? Just whatever you're comfortable with sharing.
Well, I was born and raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, that is, not Mississippi. And I lived there for at least 16 years of my life. Then I went to Germany as an exchange student. At the age of 16, I was in Germany for a year, came back at age 17, finished high school, then went off to the Virginia Military Institute for a year. A year later, went off to West Point. And I don't know what else I can tell you, except, I was raised as a Quaker because I was raised in my mother's household. My parents were divorced. Actually, I think my father just left. And so I ended up being raised in the household that belonged to my maternal grandparents. And so I went to a Quaker private school, the oldest in the country, and my mother's family had been in Philadelphia since 1681. So I had a very, very different upbringing. I grew up in a neighborhood in North Philadelphia that was full of Ukrainians and Poles and Lithuanians. There was an occasional Irishman or Italian that showed up, but generally speaking, it was heavily Slavic. And that turned out to be a very profoundly important experience for me because I became terribly interested in Central East Europe. All the people that I grew up with, their parents or their grandparents or their great-grandparents had been through World War I and World War II. They were all staunch anti-communists that had fought against communism during World War II and afterwards. So I'm very familiar, obviously, with Ukraine and that particular tragedy. Although I would tell you that the people I grew up with are radically different from the Ukrainians that you see in Kiev these days. So, my years in the military were the best years of my life. I enjoyed it immensely and was sorry to leave it when I did. But when things changed, it was time for me to go. I had gotten myself into quite a lot of trouble with the generals because I concluded after my experience in 1990 and 91 that we needed to make some rather dramatic changes in the force structure. And that was not well received by the generals who were all dedicated to preserving this World War II structure in perpetuity. So I don't have very many friends at the top. In fact, I got a message today from a good friend. He was with Donald Trump and Don Jr. And Donald Trump said, yes, I love Doug Macgregor, but nobody in the military loves him. All the generals hate him. Of course, I think that's a very healthy thing, but I'm not sure Donald completely understands what's going on yet, but I'd hoped he'd figured it out by now, but maybe not. Who knows? Anyway, so I was very fortunate in 1991 because I ended up leading an 1,100 man cavalry battle group, 42 tanks, 42 guns, 42 Bradleys, and 8 guns. We were the lead unit in 7th Corps, the first into Iraq. And so we had about 3.5 days of what I would call sporadic contact, but we were only encountering Iraqi army troops who were, for the most part, not terribly interested in fighting very hard. And we found out when we began talking to them, we actually captured somebody who was from Chicago. That's a long story. An Arab from Chicago. And of course, we said, what the hell are you doing here? He said, it's not my fault. I was here visiting and they made me join the army. And we found large numbers of these Arabs from the Tigris and Euphrates River valleys basically had been told either you join or we rape your wives and sisters in front of you. So you have a choice. So naturally, they all chose to join the army. That was not true on the last day, for us at any rate, on the 26th of February, because that's when we finally encountered what turned out to be the rear guard of the Iraqi Republican Guard Corps. And they did fight. They put up a good fight, but they were not effectively led. They were unable to coordinate a lot of things very well. But we ended up driving through lots of artillery, which was registered. I don't know if you understand what that means, but they were not very good at adjusting rounds of artillery. So they registered everything. And so we just drove around it and through it. And we came out of a sandstorm and then found all these people waiting for us, a brigade of about 2,500, 2,600. And we went through that very quickly within perhaps 15 to 20 minutes. And we kept on going until we ran out of things to shoot. And when there was nothing left to shoot, I halted the squadron battle group, and I did not have a GPS, one of these locators. So I called the troop commanders and I said, ask the scouts where are we? I mean, my words were, where are we? And then the next question was, give me a combat power response. And we'd driven through a lot of fire, tank fire, artillery fire, machine gun fire. So I was expecting a report of some casualties. And I got 100% back from everybody. I was shocked. I felt like Arnold Schwarzenegger in an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie where everybody else dies, but he comes through. But then we were halted and they wouldn't allow us to advance any further. Then they told us to fall back and I refused to. And I knew the regimental commander. He had taught me when I was a cadet at West Point. And I just said, look, we're fine. We're not going back. I didn't buy that nonsense. And he grudgingly said, "All right, but if you get into trouble, you call right away." All right, right. So we went through a lot of counterattacks. We did eventually, about an hour and a half later, lose a Bradley in one of these counterattacks. We had 6 casualties, 1 killed, and we lost the Bradley, which blew up. That's where I discovered the Bradley was not the best vehicle for the job. That's another story. Anyway, then when all of this went quiet, finally around midnight, these divisions came up behind us. They were many hours behind us, passed through and went forward. And the following morning, I discovered that we were going to be placed into reserve. And then within another 6 or 7 hours the following day, I found out that they were going to end the war. And of course, I sat there and said, why? It's not over. By then, we knew it was the rear guard of the Republican Guard Corps. We had bridges over the Euphrates, and that was our map. Our mission was to go across and then straight up to Baghdad. None of it happened. And anyhow, I've written a book about it, and there's a chapter in my book, Margin of Victory, that if you are interested, you could get a sort of a synopsis of it.
Sure.
So it was an eye-opening experience for me.
Absolutely.
And I went through a lot of other things. I was in command of the 1st and the 4th Cavalry after the war, and we went to the National Training Center and turned in the best performance of any unit in history, defeating the so-called opposing force repeatedly. That was not well received by lots of people. I mean, that may seem strange to you, but the argument was, you're supposed to come here and lose. That's how you learn. Well, I had been there as a captain with my tank company, and I said, well, I came here to win. And that was not well received. Anyhow, subsequently, the other important thing in my career was I went back to Europe in 1998 and 99. I actually got over there in November of 97 and started out as director of strategic planning for the Supreme Commander of Europe. Then eventually became the director of the Joint Operations Center for the Balkans and was intimately involved with the Kosovo air campaign, which privately I had argued against repeatedly as a disaster, which I think it was. There's never any reason to kill any Serbs. It made no sense at all. But, you know, I was a full colonel and I was working for 3 4-stars. The German and the British 4-stars both agreed with me, but the American 4-star was hell-bent to do this. So we did it. That was very good because I got a real education about air power and naval power, missiles, communications, all these kinds of things that I had not had adequately beforehand. And I also had ended up with working with people from 19 different nations. And that was great. I enjoyed that immensely. I thought the Europeans collectively were just really wonderful people. And the officers that I had were the best you could wish for. I learned a lot. It was a great experience.
Oh, yeah. Well, we have several questions related to the global conflict, but before we get into those details, what is our country, our choice's primary mission? Because we want to help promote what your organization is doing.
Well, you have Bill Bala, who's with us this evening, and he can certainly fill in details that I may miss, Bill. But I would say that our country, our choice, which I did not found, the founder was or is a gentleman who emigrated to the United States some 30 years ago from Finland and was so downhearted about the state of the United States. He said, we've got to come up with something to bring people in the United States together, you know, sort of reinforce what it is to be an American, find the things that we can unite around. So that really was the genesis of it. They asked me to be the CEO, so I was flattered and ultimately said yes. And I think the best way to describe us, we're growing very rapidly. We're closing in on half a million members. But we are people who decided that it didn't matter very much who you voted for. You pretty much got the same outcome. And the Democrat versus Republican label really wasn't very meaningful. We needed a third way forward. So then we said, what are the things that unite us? Well, we were all very, very united on the notion that these overseas interventions, which cost us $14 trillion, thousands of lives, killed hundreds of thousands of people, and ultimately failed miserably and made matters worse, should stop. So, and the constant interventionism. Secondly, we absolutely have to close the borders. We have to restore the rule of law, and the two are inextricably intertwined. But the southern border in particular has to have military power on it. The cartels are too well armed, too powerful, too aggressive. It's more than the Border Patrol can handle. And then we need to restore the rule of law inside the United States. I mean, we can't operate in an environment where the police are afraid to do their jobs for fear that they'll be prosecuted. And that's not to say that police don't make mistakes. We all make mistakes. We understand that, but this is out of control now. And we think the laws need to be strengthened. And ultimately, we think that the illegals need to be expelled. What we have recommended, what we think is the appropriate thing to do, is to tell everybody they've got 90 days to leave. And if you leave voluntarily on the way out, register with us. And when the situation in the United States improves, we'll contact you and you can come back. You know, if that's what you voluntarily do. On the other hand, if you refuse to leave and you try to avoid it, we will eventually find you. You will be incarcerated. You will be prosecuted as a criminal, and we will confiscate all of your property, whatever it is in the United States. So that's our standing on that. The other thing is we became very, very excited about finding ways to defeat human trafficking, especially the trafficking of children. I had no idea that it had reached the point where we are missing 500,000 American children every year. They just disappear. And that doesn't even begin to address what happens over the border, coming up and going down. And women and how they are treated and the drugs and so forth. And we can't understand why, no one seems to be terribly upset over the loss of 110, 120,000 lives a year to something like fentanyl. And we want to go to war all over the place. And we want to defend other people's borders and involve ourselves in other people's affairs. It doesn't make any sense to us.
So, Colonel, we have a lot of questions that we're going to try to drill in and get answers on. So, because we got a small window with you, and then members want to ask you from all over the country. We got people in Hawaii and Alaska, Washington State, and California, all over. So, Colonel, if the world was playing a game of risk, would the U.S. be playing with all its pieces in the wrong continents, or are we just really that bad at strategy? Go ahead.
Well, first of all, there is no strategy. Now, for most of our history, to be honest with you, we haven't really needed much of a strategy. I mean, the real strategic questions only became acute at the beginning of the 20th century. And our view historically was that we have everything we need here. We don't have to go anywhere else to get it. And the general consensus was that we should not meddle in the affairs of others, that our business is here in the Western Hemisphere. And we have an interest in security in the Western Hemisphere, our security as well as the security of others. We still think that that's valid. But the two world wars changed all of that. We could spend a lot of time talking about those mistaken decisions and so forth and how we became involved. But I think the view now is that you cannot fly this aircraft with the seat of your pants. You cannot make decisions on impulse. You cannot simply emote, and you have to tell the truth. Yeah, I was stunned when I heard Lindsey Graham tell everybody about all the valuable minerals and oil, gas, coal, rare earths, and everything else that could be found in Ukraine. Well, that was known before the war began, but I had no idea that we had suddenly developed an interest in controlling any of it. Historically, we had no strategic interest in Ukraine at all. And in fact, when I was at SHAPE headquarters, Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, we all concluded that Ukraine's most important mission was to be this neutral territory between us and Russia and a bridge between us and Russia, as opposed to being a catalyst for conflict. So there is no strategy at the moment, and there is no willingness to say that unless we ourselves are directly attacked, we should not attack others. And that is a basic fundamental truth that we think should be at the center of any military strategy. You know, Eisenhower said when he was president, and he cut back on defense spending dramatically and reduced the armed forces. He was the bane of everyone's existence in the Pentagon. But he said, I think Americans deserve prosperity and security. They need both. You can't have one without the other. And he was very, very sensitive to the economy. And of course, by the time he left, we had dramatically changed our position. We were deeply in debt when he took over, and we were almost completely out by the time he left. We think that he had the right idea, and we can be strong and capable without necessarily building for offensive operations all over the globe. Is that enough?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so how do you perceive the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the proxy war? Hamas?
Well,
okay, that's it.
the war in Ukraine is a good example of no strategy.
Yeah.
There was no systematic thinking, no strategic analysis. And if there was one done, I certainly never saw any evidence for it. We were completely ignorant of Ukraine and Russia, not understanding the history, the culture, the geography. There was no particular concern about any of it. We decided that this, I think when I say we, I'm talking about the leadership of the Uniparty in Washington, that it was in our interest to harm Russia. And whenever we decide to harm a country, whether it's Iraq or Afghanistan or Russia or anybody else, we demonize the leadership. We demonize the ruling class and so forth. That's what we did. And I think that they assumed that Russia was inherently backward. Remember the comments that Russia is just a gas station with nuclear weapons, these kinds of remarks that came out of the mouths of people that knew nothing about Russia or Eastern Europe. And we decided we could bully them through sanctions because that's how we do business. If a nation doesn't want to cooperate with us, doesn't like us, we sanction them. You have to like us and pretend at least to imitate us, or we regard you as the enemy. This has been going on really since 1965. So that has to end. And unfortunately, having gotten into this thing without there's a framework that we like to use in the military. It says purpose, method, and end state. What's the purpose of the mission of the operation? How do you plan to do it? And what do you want things to look like when it's over? Well, this failed in Iraq because Paul Wolfowitz said, when we're through, this will be the first Arab liberal democracy in the Middle East, and it will be friendly to Israel. Only if you're smoking crack on a routine basis could anyone possibly buy into that stupid notion. But everybody did. And now we took the position, well, Ukraine will now become a liberal democracy and join NATO. And if Russia opposes this, we will fight them and we will support the Ukrainians in their quote unquote bid for independence and freedom. Nobody bothered to point out that the majority of people, when they were asked in the electorate, said, we don't want to join NATO.
Right.
That wasn't important. We removed the government, installed a new one. And I think Putin was very naive because of all the Russians that have governed that country, certainly within the last 100 years, he's arguably the most pro-Western. And he actually lived in Germany, speaks German. He knows a great deal about the West. And he's constantly under pressure in Russia to effectively distance Russia from the West. And he's tried to do the opposite. He says, no, we have a future with Europe and with the United States. We don't want to be divorced from them. And their attitude is, well, they don't accept us. And see, you were wrong. You were nice, and look where it got us. So, you know, we're now in a position where we face probably the best army in the world, certainly the best air defenses in the world, a good air force, a superb submarine fleet. The rest of the Russian fleet isn't very impressive, but the submarine fleet certainly is. And a very resolute, highly nationalistic country that is determined to fight us to the bitter end, which I don't think is in our interest or is something we set out to achieve. I think the assumption was the Russians will fold. You know, they're not going to fold. Russia is not Iraq. It's a real country with a real history, real cultural foundation. And of course, you know, it's a very devout Russian Orthodox system or church. that is at the center of Russian life. And of course, that's anathema to most people in Washington, who, though they may not admit it, are nihilistic, atheistic, and scornful of people that believe in anything. The vast majority don't, to be honest.
Perfect.
Given that the World Health Organization declared monkeypox a global health emergency, coincidentally 82 days before the US election, we already know that there are way too many consequences going on. Yes, coincidences going on in recent years. What are the implications for political motivations? Trying to mask this as a public health policy, do you think that this is COVID 2.0 to interfere with the US elections again?
You're talking now about monkeypox. Is that what I'm hearing about?
Yeah.
Or another bird flu or virus or something?
Yeah.
Look, these people
Distraction.
may try anything. Remember, these people are in power. They want to stay there. Let's be frank. You've already got the elections rigged in the blue states. You know, I think it would be Pennsylvania should be a red state. I'm very familiar with it. My mother was actually the president of the Republican Women of Pennsylvania, so I know the state quite well. It would normally be blue. Normally red. There are two blue spots. One is Philadelphia and the other is Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
We haven't had a clean election in Philadelphia in 60 years. All right. That's the kind of place where people will actually say, we need another 40,000 ballots, fill them out, get them up here right away, and it'll happen. So I don't have any hope for a clean election there. Now, I don't know what it's like in Michigan and Wisconsin. I hear Wisconsin's not good. I don't know how Michigan will be. Nevada and Arizona would be solidly red states, but they're struggling with internal corruption too in specific counties, as you know. Georgia cannot be taken for granted because you have, I think it's Fulton County,
Yep.
which is a permanent thorn in everybody's side. In other words, the whole notion of liberal democracy in the United States has been corrupted, undermined. So, I'm sure they may attempt something. I think it's going to be difficult to sell that to the American people. Yeah. I think, the left is, in other words, somebody called me today, by the way, and said, these two parties, they say, well, the right wing of the Republican Party is now the party of Israel. And the left wing of the Republican Party left wing of the Uniparty calls itself the party of color. So it looks like the emphasis is on hatred, divisiveness, fomenting conflict. We saw that in 2020.
Yeah.
And I think we're facing some of that again. I'm surprised we've gotten this far without more violence. There are too many people interested in sabotaging and subverting the republic. And you have to understand that I think if you watch Netanyahu speak to the United States Congress, all those people clapping vigorously, they're all on the payroll. The lobby has bought them. Thomas Massey did not attend. He was the only Republican that didn't show up. And I think there were 10 or 12 Democrats who did not. So you've got a real problem right now. It reminds me of the Roman Senate in the 4th century, or the 3rd century. Everybody's purchased it. So it's no longer a viable institution. I think Americans no longer have much confidence in our institutions. And to be blunt, they probably should not. But I'm frustrated because I don't hear candidates address these things forthrightly. Everyone's afraid to.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And on that note, Colonel, this is our last question. And those that are watching the live stream, now we're going to open it up to all the other members that are connected with the Red America First Town Hall. And they're going to be able to interact with Colonel Douglas Macgregor live here. So, Colonel, given the current political climate, if you were to write a sequel to The Art of War, would you title it The Art of Political Survival? Or would you call it How to Navigate a Circus Blindfolded?
Well, I'm about to give a presentation in Alabama where I'm going to try and address these things. And I go down through a list of things that we have to do if we're going to survive as a country. I get into arguments, for instance, they say, well, you're anti-Israeli. No, I'm extremely supportive of Israel. I think it's a very positive state. It can play a great role. I think Mr. Netanyahu is leading it to disaster. And I'm afraid that it could be destroyed as a result of this, because he's done something that no one else has done in 1,000 years. He's united Sunni and Shia, Turks, Persians, and Arabs universally against Israel. In fact, Israel is so miserably seen in most of the world right now that if we go to a major war, and I think we will, I think we're going to see that unfortunately break in the Middle East, most of the world is going to be against Israel, because it will spread rapidly, particularly if the Israelis do some of the things that they say they will. They're going to destroy the oil terminals in Iran. Well, that'll drive the price of gas to $8 to $12 a gallon. That will block the Straits of Hormuz, and China, Japan, Korea, Northeast Asia depends very heavily on all that oil and gas coming through the straits there. I think he's the ruin of Israel. So I think it's a great mistake that has been made in Washington to simply unconditionally support and underwrite anything he wants to do. But, you know, here we are. That's where it is. We've now committed all these carriers, all this aircraft. We're on a dangerous road right now. And we
Perfect.
seem to
So-
think we are invulnerable, invincible.
Perfect. So just so you guys know, there's a clock that's going right above my head, just to help make sure Colonel can get the answer within a minute, and
Yep.
make sure the questions are within 30 seconds, because a lot of questions up. We got one from Texas, 2 from Florida, 1 from Hawaii, more coming. Doug, Texas, you're first up. 30 seconds. Go for it. Thank you so much in advance. Doug, thank you.
Well, pleasure having you on, Colonel. It's always a breath of fresh air to hear that point of view. I was over there in the SWA for a long time as well, but that's not my question. My question is with all of these things, all of these distractions that are going on around the world right now, I feel like they're trying to distract us off of the 2 or 3 main topics that we should be focused on. What do you think those would be?
Well, the very first thing that has to be done is the border. We have to protect the borders and the coastal waters. We have the Coast Guard patrolling the Persian Gulf and the South China Sea. What in the hell is the Coast Guard doing there? We should be tightening our control over our harbors, our ports, our airports, all of these things. We have no idea who's in this country now. It's a very dangerous situation. So the number one priority is get control of these, and understand that once you control the borders and the littoral waters, and you stop the flow of drugs and human trafficking, we will have a war inside the United States with the drug cartels. Organized crime will have to be crushed inside the United States. It's that bad.
Wow.
So that's number one. Now, what's number 2? I think we have to have a new strategy, which is essentially hemispheric defense. We have to begin disengaging our forces from these overseas commitments. Warfare has changed. Technology has changed. You cannot ship hundreds of thousands of U.S. troops across the Atlantic and the Pacific with impunity. You have space-based intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. You have submarines. You have long-range precision strike that belong to not only the major powers, but other middleweight powers. We will lose everything as we try to move it across the oceans. We've got to get out of this business of thinking in terms of military power first. We have to build up our economic strength. We have to repatriate manufacturing to this country, and we can do that. It's all a matter of willpower and effective leadership. We've got to do those things.
Outstanding question and answer there. Mike, Florida, 30 seconds, and then Colonel response. We'll give him 70 seconds. Go.
Hey, Colonel, it's a pleasure to be on the show with you. September 18th, Donald Trump gets sentenced. My understanding is they want to throw him in jail. What's your opinion on that?
It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So I wouldn't worry about it.
All right, so we're not going to worry about that one too much. Perfect. Thank you for that. Teresa, Florida, go for it. Thank you. 30 seconds.
God bless you, Colonel Macgregor. Thank you so much for coming and joining us. Well, I love that answer that you just gave, but I wanted to ask you, I listened to like Derek Johnson and Juan O'Savin, and I just want to know, is the military really going to be there for us? You know, I'm very patriotic. but I want to know, is the military, the good guys, going to be there for us when things get worse than they already are?
Most of the senior ranks are corrupted by the political influence and the false concepts and ideas associated with wokeness and so forth. I mean, I would regard most of the senior officers as windsocks. They blow with the wind. Some of them may believe in it, but the vast majority are simply doing whatever they have to do to get promoted. We do not have a professional officer corps. We do not promote it on the basis of demonstrated character, competence, and intelligence. We promote for every other conceivable reason you can think of. So I think the senior ranks are a big problem. Now, once you get down to lower levels, it's going to be mixed. A lot of good men and women who are at lower levels, though, rapidly discover the way things are going and they leave. That's a big problem. We've got to attract a lot of this talent back into the organization that's left. But there are still patriots at lower levels. But how much can you expect them to do? It's hard to tell. It's just like the policeman who says, I want to stop this, but if I go over there, I'm going to be either prosecuted or persecuted for doing it. And then if I object, I could lose my pension and I'm out on the street. The same question comes up for the non-commissioned officer who served 15, 16 years, done a great job, and he says, this is all nonsense, but what do I do? How can I object? I lose everything. Now, that could change if we go through the financial disaster that could result from this war. Now, our financial condition is already fragile. But if you go to war in the Middle East and you block the Straits of Hormuz, you destroy these oil terminals, the game is going to change. And it's going to bring in the Russians, the Chinese, everybody else. New world. And I don't see how we avoid financial Armageddon at that point.
Thank you so much for that, Colonel McGay. So from Hawaii, 30-second question. Go for it.
Good evening, Colonel. As you know, Hawaii's trade routes to the Pacific. And everyone has their eye on Hawaii from other nations. Are we under any real present danger or threat in this war that's taking place and unfolding?
You talk about the war in the Middle East? I mean, yes, that's very dangerous. We don't know how that could spread and what the consequences might be. It's very unpredictable. It's back to the same problem we had when we decided to create this army to attack Russia in Ukraine. That and essentially educated them to hate the Russians and tried to push every button we could find. We did not know where this could lead. We had no way of anticipating it. We hadn't thought about it. Well, the same thing is true in Asia. Asia, by the way, is not a place that wants to go to war. The Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, the Filipinos, the Indonesians, the people in Southeast Asia, nobody wants to go to war. There's no interest in it. And, we have people in the Pentagon trying to convince us that we should be prepared to intervene when the Vietnamese fishermen and the Chinese fishermen decide to duke it out over fishing grounds. I don't think that's a reason to go to war. I think they should sort that out on their own. Same thing for the Filipinos. I don't think we need to get involved with that. That's not a cause for war. So no, unless we're really stupid over this Taiwan thing. If we try to put missiles on that island, you're going to get a war with China. So don't do it.
Thank you for that. Pastor Bart Denny, go ahead with your question. And then Tanya is on deck. And then thank you so much. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Colonel. Glad to have you here tonight. If you were to predict the unpredictable, it seems like between Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Hamas, the common factor between the two kind of being us. I feel like this drags us into global conflict. Do you see it playing out that way, or as an inevitability?
No, because frankly, though people in the United States are not informed about it, the war in Ukraine is actually winding down. Hundreds of thousands of troops have left the battlefield. They're surrendering. I know from my intelligence friends that Mr. Zelensky has packed his bags moved his billions into bank accounts overseas, bought his new estates and new automobiles, and he's ready to leave at a moment's notice. I think this thing is coming to an end this summer. There's nowhere else for it to go. It's like this silly penetration. 11,000 men, they've already lost half of them. They penetrated an area where nobody lives, dense forest. This is a big area. This is like Texas, only heavily forested with multiple rivers and so forth. You can find plenty of places to go. There's nothing there. They tried to get to the Kursk nuclear power plant. They thought that they could use that as a bargaining chip, or worse, cause an accident. It failed. They lost. Thank God.
Well, perfect. We got a question coming in from Florida. Tanya from Florida, go ahead with your question. Thank you.
Hi. First off, Colonel Macgregor, thank you so much for spending time with us average Americans. That is a wonderful thing to see. And I have been an avid follower of yours for quite some time. And it's such an honor. So thank you for your service and everything that you've done for us. There is inner turmoil within the United States. There is a lot of external turmoil. And it's hard to kind of formulate a question, but my question is more or less election based. Nevada, the ballots in Nevada have already expired. They can no longer change the names on those ballots for Joe Biden over to Harris, and unless he dies. And so my question really is, what are they going to do with Nevada? How are they going to go around that? Because Nevada is an important state. Sorry, it ran long.
No, I'm glad you said Nevada. I thought you were going to say, what are they going to do with Biden? I don't even want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. I don't have an easy answer for it. I would say you could have some sort of agreement reached across party lines, I suppose, in the Senate and the House. I don't know. A lot depends on the governors. This is a difficult question, and I'm not an attorney. And by the way, I'm an average American, so I'm happy to talk to other average Americans.
Oh wow, that's very nice of you. We got Rosemary, Florida, and then we're going to transition to the Golden State, California. Go ahead, Rosemary. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Colonel Macgregor, for everything you've been doing. I have been at some meetings where I've seen you before, but I would like to ask the direction of our country if, God forbid, if the Democrats win the presidency, what do you foresee as the dangers for America?
I cannot imagine Vice President Harris, given the people that are really pulling the strings behind her, as changing anything that you've already seen. In fact, I would expect them to double down on it and try to weaponize every portion of the government they can against us. So I think that's what you have to expect. I wish I could give you a better answer on that, but that's the truth. And by the way, RFK Jr. said exactly the same thing recently in an interview, why he could not possibly have anything to do with the Democratic Party, because it is not the Democratic Party it was.
Yeah, it's absolutely way too progressive, and they're putting the American people last. That's for sure. Okay, so Rob, Ohio, we can't see your camera. I don't know if you're covered, but go ahead with your question if you're there. If not, Ken, California, what's your question?
Okay.
Go ahead, Rob.
Okay. Welcome, Colonel. Are you on the quiet skies list like Tulsi Gabbard? Would you have
Not
any
that I'm
idea?
aware of.
Haven't gotten around to you yet, huh? Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Okay. Ken, California, please go with your question. Thank you.
Hi, Colonel. This is Ken. Finally, I'm able to talk to you. When you started our country, our choice, I became your member right away. I have sent many emails. I have followed you like a hawk. I've listened to every interview you have given out there, especially Judge Napolitano, Gerald Salante, and Mr. Ritter, who is
What's your
also.
question, Ken, please?
My question is very simple. The root cause of the problem where we are today in our nation is follow the money. It is the petrodollar where the fraud problem we are facing as a nation. Unless we address that, nothing will be resolved in our country. And if you know, Chris Hedges has given a big book on it, How Private Equity Conquered America. And that's where I want to focus with the whole group. Sit down. Here I can't talk too much. I'm a whistleblower. I suffered 14 years at the hands of the Washington assholes, from financial committee to banking committee to oversight committee, Wall Street, Netflix scam. If you pull my case in Washington, D.C., Obama should be in jail. James Comey should be in jail. Loretta Lynch should be in jail.
So Ken, what's your question real quick?
My question is, how do we address the root cause of the petrodollar fraud? All wars are bankers' wars. Thomas Jefferson versus Hamilton. That's where the discussion should lie at this time in history, if we want to steer the nation into the right direction.
Thank you for that, Ken. Very good question.
Well,
Colonel,
admittedly,
the petrodollar.
a lot of graft and corruption in Washington is frankly legalized. I mean, normally we would call it graft and corruption, but you can't, because the Congress can't police itself. It's passed laws that allow it to do all sorts of things that are fundamentally wrong. The way to attack your problem is, frankly, to be prepared for the financial crisis that I think is coming. And that will provide us with an opportunity to delve into this issue and deal with it. Now, we should have done that in 2007 and 2008. It didn't happen. Instead, we bailed everybody out at 100% on the dollar, and we argued that doing that would save the world, save everything, keep our reserve currency, petrodollar, everything. It did, but it was temporary, because we've done nothing to fix the underlying problems. So I have to tell you that to get the kind of change that you want, which I think is justified, we're going to have to go through this catharsis of financial meltdown and collapse in order to get to the point where we can do the things you're suggesting. And it's going to take some people who are much more knowledgeable about the whole thing than I am. And I've met some of them. They're out there, but I haven't heard their names mentioned in either party yet.
Yes, and Colonel, to piggyback on what you said about the Uniparty, this platform believes that exists. You know, what they're doing to the independents, pushing them out on debates and all this stuff, it's just more and more rigged. But we got one of our pillar leaders on the training side, Randy Perham in Texas, with this question. Go ahead. Thank you. 30 seconds, and then the Colonel gets 70 seconds. Thank you.
Hey, good evening, Colonel. Thanks for joining us tonight. Truly appreciate it. And I've been sitting here listening the whole entire time. And, my last assignment was working in NATO in Italy, Naples, Italy. And I worked on one of the exercise plans for GRP for Ukraine and Russia in 2019, ironically. And my question to you is, I see this this campaign with Russia and Ukraine as being that of a distraction, a global distraction, to pave the way for BRICS. What are your thoughts about BRICS being the formulation of BRICS where it stands right now, sir? Thank you.
Sure. Well, BRICS, as you know, is really an attempt to build an alternative to the system that we dominate. We dominate the financial system, and we use it to bully everybody. And people are tired of being bullied. I mean, we've been telling people in Southeast Asia and Latin America what crops to grow, even though they would not grow those crops normally. We tried to do the same thing in Africa. So you've got people all over the world that have said, we've had it with the United States. We're tired of being hostage to whatever policy you're demanding. People ask, why do the Chinese do so well when they move into Africa or Latin America? Well, it's very simple. They come in there and they say, listen, we're not here to reform you. This is your country. We respect your government and your culture. We just want to do business. That's very attractive, especially when the United States shows up and says, well, we think you have all these problems with human rights violations, and we're not going to do business with you unless you address all these things. We can't loan you any money because we control the World Bank, we control the monetary funds, all these things. And you have to meet these standards, and we have to see that you have democratically elected leaders, and on and on and on. So BRICS is growing very, very rapidly because everybody wants to go over there and get out from under us. I mean, that's it. There are 84 countries right now waiting to join BRICS. So if you look at the ones that are there now, and they're what, 132 in the world? And see, this is the other problem. People in Washington don't get it. You know, India and China, you put them together, that's more than a substantial chunk of the world's population. Then add Indonesia, Southeast Asia. We haven't even gotten to Africa and Latin America. These people don't understand. The world consists of much, much more than us and NATO and our little treaties that we've set up and the little exercises that we conduct. We've lost a decent respect for others, their interests, their needs, their culture, their way of life. We walk in and say, oh, well, you know, this is all wrong and you've got to do this. I mean, it's a huge, huge problem. It needs to stop. And the arrogance in Washington is stunning when it comes to this, when you go to the State Department and the Pentagon.
So, Colonel, we got two more questions. One really quick one. I was trying to call a couple of your Philadelphia folks. They live in Philly. One of them, Steven, and the other is Tom. Tom had enough of it, and he's moving to Florida. But Steve, go ahead and ask the Colonel a question, and we'll let Tom as well. Go ahead.
Well, it seems like Philadelphia is getting worse all the time. They're getting bolder. They know that they're risking losing their power. I don't know if there's any way to clean it up. They're very hostile. I've heard every story in the book about how to cheat, and they even have buses that ride them around from place to place, and people that can keep other people out. How can they ever straighten it out and change it? And Philadelphia is one thing. How do you straighten it out? How do you straighten out the military when so high a percentage of upper officers, and they're all corrupt? They're corrupted. I had another guy tell me from the Air Force. He said, we have all woke people telling us what to do now.
Yeah.
How are you going to straighten it out?
Well, I think the way things will be straightened out is that I think we'll get this financial collapse, this crisis that's coming. It's going to be accelerated and worsened by the war in the Middle East. That's going to create opportunity. And you've got to have somebody at the helm in Washington with the vision and understanding to take action. And that means that you've got to mass remove large numbers of people at the top. You know, one of the problems that Donald Trump encountered was that he showed up and he thought these people running around with stars on their shoulders were something like George Patton. He didn't understand. You know, these people, most of them had never heard a shot fired in anger. Most of these people had never done a damn thing, you know, except sit behind the desk and approve a PowerPoint plan to target somebody in a mud hut someplace in Afghanistan or Iraq. So you've got to get people to understand that you have to make changes. You know, the French Revolution produced this kind of environment. And most of the people that ended up as generals and marshals for Napoleon had been sergeants in the army of the French. So I think you're going to see some of that have to happen. That went on in previous wars. I think you're aware of it. And we're going to have to do something like that. And then you're going to have to put the police and the military to work together and go very deliberately into the big cities. And I think it will happen. But it's going to take time. It's going to take us 10 years to recover from the last 50, if we're lucky.
So Colonel, my question to you, first, thank you for coming on Red America First. We're very appreciative of that. But we want to know if we could have you come back before the election in November.
Well, I would think so. You know, I don't see any reason why not, unless, what's his name? Merrick Garland decides to tell Ray to arrest me or something. I would otherwise be here.
Okay.
I just got a new attorney, so hopefully that won't happen.
Okay.
Let me tell you one thing that before we go here. This is very important, and I keep telling audiences this all the time. All of us have to become Americans. We can't have dual loyalties. We can't be something else and then American. Everybody has to be an American who is an American. And I don't care what their racial background is or anything else, or how much money they make. If they want to be Americans, they're part of us. We have to unite. We got to throw out all these labels. We have to unify across party lines. And there are plenty of people out there, that I run into them all the time, that ask me, well, how do we do this? By making the decision, first of all, first and foremost, I'm an American, and I'm going to evaluate everything from now on through this lens. Is it good for the United States?
Yeah.
Is it good for the American people? Don't fall into this trap of, I'm a member of this tribe. Is this good or bad for my tribe? That's catastrophic. That will ruin us. It's already plaguing us right now in Washington, D.C. Either you're an American or you're not. Make up your mind. And we really have to emphasize that more than anything. One people, one law, the Constitution, and one language. Now, you can speak anything you want. I'm fluent in German, but I'm an American. I speak English.
That's good, yeah.
You know, so that's what has to happen. That's more important now than ever in our history. And if we don't move down that road, I don't think we'll make it.
Well, thank you so much again. That was Colonel Douglas Macgregor, Our Country, Our Choice, CEO, amazing patriot, and he will come back to Red America First. Thank you so much, Colonel.
Thank you.
Okay.
Colonel.
We appreciate that. We're going to